Hello, I'm Sam Sparks, and my research question was, do previous successes in creating allies out of former enemies post-World War II be used to help U.S. efforts in Reconstruction, creating new allies in the modern era? I chose this topic because the United States has had a history of failing to create successful states and rebuilding countries after war, which has led to a cycle of failed states. If the United States continues its current strategy, this cycle could repeat in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as new regions such as Syria in the future. The United States' best successes in rebuilding states occurred post-World War II, yet the United States has failed to learn from these victories. Some definitions to help the presentation. The Economic Recovery Program is also known as the Marshall Plan, and this was the comprehensive strategy used to assist Western European nations in the rebuilding process after World War II. And then gross national product, which is the total value of goods produced and services provided by a country during the war. And then my list review began with throughout the past century, the United States has taken part in multiple unilateral and multilateral actions in order to rebuild nations. And out of the 16 they had in the past century, only 4 have been successful, 2 of those being very small countries and the other 2 being Germany and Japan, which are more in line with reconstruction efforts rather than true nation building. And having such a small success rate from nation building and reconstruction indicates that the current strategy needs to be replaced. One of the main ways the Marshall Plan, or the European Recovery Program, was implemented into Western European countries and their respective economies was not through blanket aid agreements, but rather counterpart funds. These works as the United States sold goods and services such as shipping across the Atlantic Ocean, which were then bought with the local currencies. These currencies were consolidated into the central bank called ERP special accounts in order for their use to be controlled through economic recovery accounts. And then the post-World War II order was characterized by an increasing ideological battle between capitalism and communism. And the results of the Marshall Plan not only secured free market economies, but provided a stark contrast to Eastern European growth. Professors Rademacher and Deal state that the efforts of the ERP created the necessary frameworks and opportunities for free trade in an unprecedented 20-year worldwide economic expansion. In current U.S. strategy, the failures in Iraq's reconstruction is evident through the use of 2-track systems and non-inclusive forms of government, as well as a general sense of unpreparedness. After the initial invasion, foreign policy experts commented that the Bush administration officials have no clue about what to do in Iraq tomorrow, much less in a month ago, which further demonstrates how the U.S. has been unprepared in its nation-building efforts and why the strategy needs to change. And then reform efforts often failed, as evidenced by the inclusion of more U.S.-oriented members, such as the Iraqi exiles and non-Iraqi Kurds. The emphasis on these minority groups in the country served to alienate the majority of the country, as they saw the U.S. returning to the age of colonialism. The main gap in literature now is that the connection between the failures of our current strategy and research strategy and reconstruction and the successes of the Marshall Plan. The gap is important as there are needed changes in strategy, yet it's important to look at the parts of the Marshall Plan that are most applicable. My hypothesis is that the current failures of U.S. policy can be directly solved with a modern Marshall Plan style strategy, and that if changes are not made, current strategy will not be successful, leading to failures of current efforts in areas such as Iraq. My research was done mainly using scholarly sources focusing on foreign policy and history experts who specialize in specific fields. All these articles were peer-reviewed, which serve to increase the validity of the research and better communicate the reasoning behind it. My research was based off a variety of factors, mainly quantitative and qualitative research combined to form a more mixed method approach. This provided a more holistic approach to the research process. Most of the quantitative research done was on economic and personnel deployments, such as troop numbers and monetary commitments, while the qualitative research was mainly done through expert opinions and first-hand accounts, such as an account from the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. In my results, it was found that the Western nations were under the current strategy have applied economic liberalization policies too quickly, such as restructured public sector spending, democratization, human rights, civil society, and labor standards, which has led to weakened governments having too many programs to anyone effectively execute. And while these things like human rights and civil society are very important, is that the current U.S. strategy is focused on implementing them right away, and that implementation has led to the country not being able to succeed in the basics, such as services for the people and infrastructure, and not being able to really succeed in economically. In Iraq, the United States focused on working with factions that were more minorities and extremely pro-United States, such as the Iraqi National Congress, Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, and the Kurdistan Democratic Party. And while it's important that we have allies in these countries were mainly Shia Muslims, and then we kind of left them out of the process. We didn't leave them out of the process. We gave them less of a voice than maybe we should have because they're the majority group in the country. And then to show this, when the United States created an Iraqi governing council to help create a constitution and a rule of law for the country, Shia Muslims, the majority group, were only given around 50%, while minorities such as the Kurds and Sunnis, as well as Turkish citizens and Christians, were also given a place on the council. And while it's important these minority groups have a say in what's going on, it's also important that we don't alienate the majority of the country. When looking at the Marshall Plan, the European Recovery Program did not have isolated funds that were directly restricted to certain programs and initiatives, but rather provided a way for individual countries participating in the program to use the funds in the most effective manner. And examples of that, Britain had a large amount of war debt, and they used some of these funds to relieve themselves of that war debt, which was very helpful for them because it kept them from widespread debt and crisis in the economy. And then it was also used in West Germany. And West Germany had a lot of issues with rebuilding their heavy industry as it was destroyed during the war. So the recovery program allowed for countries to use their aid effectively rather than just in blanket ways. And it was the Marshall Plan. Another important aspect is that it was comprehensive to all of Europe, including the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc in Eastern Europe. And this is important because it brought all the countries of Western Europe to the table to work together, reintegrating the country after a decade of war, which is really important, especially since it reintegrated Western Germany back into allies with France and Britain, which we see today. And then this shows the spread of the Marshall Plan funds. And while some countries get more money, such as France and the United Kingdom, it's because they, based on population and economy, they needed more money. But proportionately, most of these countries who choose to participate in the plan were able to receive a decent amount of money to support their country and rebuild, which was very important. That the United States didn't just focus on the United Kingdom and France, which led to more comprehensive success of the whole region, not a few countries. And then research has shown that if a plan similar to the Economic Recovery Program would be instituted for the countries in the Middle East, it would be important to follow that same strategy. And such as we couldn't just give our allies, which is Saudi Arabia and Israel, a favoritism for investment, and then we need to have an equal playing field with countries that we may not as much like, such as Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And then in the first year of implementation, the Marshall Plan accounted for 10% of the entire federal budget, and the total cost came out to about $13 billion, or 1% of the nation's gross national product, which that $13 billion is equivalent to about $580 billion in today's money. And then the type of financial commitment today is really lacking, as only 0.15% of the current GNP is committed to foreign aid development in general, and that's even less than what the United Nations recommends for all countries to have about 0.7%. And then when looking at the results of this research, the failures in research strategy of the United States serve to show how the Marshall Plan program could be effective, because the Marshall Plan provided a way for total economic commitment and then inclusion of the native countries in the process, which are direct failures of what the policy is today. And then issues arising over these funds are all addressed in the Marshall Plan strategy. And according to the most recent information from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, the United States GNP in 2016 was about $18.8 trillion. So a similar commitment to about 1% of our GNP would be about $188 billion, which would be a massive economic commitment, which is important to look at, but it's also important to look at how that plan is distributed among all the Middle Eastern countries, and it would have to not just be to the ones we found favorable, but to all countries in the region, support the Middle East region as a whole. And then one of the limitations of this plan is that the demographics of the Middle East are fundamentally more heterogeneous than Europe, and then these ethnic differences are important because it leads to a lot more competing groups and factions within the country, which leads to the United States needing to give a little bit more flexibility, maybe in the past with the Marshall Plan, in order for those factions to be able to work within the plan and achieve their own goals. And then another important limitation is that the economic commitment would need to be at least 1% of the GNP, and that's a large portion of the federal budget and what we would have to increase a lot of our foreign spending. And then future research, one of the main areas identified future research would be looking at potential areas for reconstruction and setting up future plans for conflict. I believe looking at areas where conflicts arise, such as Syria, which is in conflict currently, and then even looking at areas like North Korea or the Korean Peninsula as a whole would be important, because these strategies need to be in place beforehand, and they take a lot of time, and I think it would be important for future research to look at how these strategies could apply to regions we haven't encountered yet. And then the implications of this research: if there are not changes to the current U.S. strategy, the strategies used in Iraq and Afghanistan will continue in areas such as Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan now, and our flawed strategies will continue. The cycle of failing to build allies in successful states will continue, hurting not only the United States' efforts in the region, but will fail to provide the people who live there a successful state. And that's one of the main issues, is that when we fail to create states, they not only hurt our foreign policy efforts, we hurt the people who live there, and they are not able to get goods and services, which is a major problem with how we rebuild nations today. Thank you. That's my presentation. These are my references.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. Very well done. Question for you. You list a lot of your sources up here, and there's obviously a wide variety. What was the most valuable or useful source that you encountered that you felt like you used the most?
I think for just general content, I think my interview with my mentor, Dr. Leroy, he's a professor at NTU, was very helpful. So I think he helped me narrow down my research question. It was a little bit more broad beforehand. And then he also served to provide like a deeper context of how the Marshall Plan happened and then what kind of issues we see today. And then another important piece of research was looking at the economic components of it and finding how those economic components impact what we do today.
Okay. Thank you.